trained a lot of other people through in the federal government and state governments, and everywhere people said, I never knew there was such a thing. This is fabulous. Can somebody look at these letters we found? We have a cold case. It never occurred to us that this could help us solve crimes. So this was our mantra: language can solve and prevent crimes. So I have my own consulting, and some of my clients have been the FBI, Department of Justice, Apple, Turnitin, and many of these with my colleague, Tammy Gales, who co-directs the program with me at Hofstra. Facebook, the JTTF, the British government asked me to go over and train their folks in the run-up to the London Olympics, and I recruited Jim, and we went over there. Prime Minister of Canada, and many, many public defenders. And forensic linguistics has been admitted in court cases of murder, threats, forgery, fraud, all kinds of major crimes. And notice that all of these deal with language. Just like chemistry helps us in doing postmortems, and physics helps us in figuring out ballistics, forensic linguistics helps when evidence is language, and very, very little in the law is not language. Every time we open our mouths or keyboards, we can reveal all sorts of things about ourselves. Because people vary their language according to what their native language is, what their occupation, what TV channels they watch, what news sources, etc. Movies watched here at the bottom has an arrow to the terrible story of JonBenet Ramsey, the little girl who was murdered and found in her parents' house. And there was a ransom note written that we're fairly sure was written by somebody in the family. And Jim has pointed out that in that letter, there was reference, direct and even quotations almost, to a couple of movies that the Ramsey had recently watched or rented. So here is from a profiling case on the West Coast that I did. And what does anybody here see that could enlighten us as to how we could shrink the suspect pool of who was doing this threatening? That's what forensic linguistics does. It shrinks suspect pools. We can never say that Mr. John Smith wrote a certain document, but we can exclude people very, very much the same way that DNA actually does. DNA experts have told me many times they do not make positive, they make negative assessments and exclude people.
If I can interrupt for just a second, when Dr. Leonard asks a question, you are invited to respond in chat because everybody's muted. So,
right. Yes. So people are picking up on exactly the thing. Since a very long time, since non-native speaker, exactly. Very good. Yes, and there are other features too. Very good. I can see that. Now, I won't be able, of course, to have the time to go over everything that people say in the chat because we don't have unlimited time. But if one takes classes with us, of course, this is exactly what we do, this back and forth, people in groups working together and then comparing notes and being challenged by us. So when we saw this since, I looked at it 100 times before I realized, wait a minute, there is something wrong. Maybe this is a translation of depuis longtemps. And indeed, we did have a French guy in the suspect pool, and he matched in a lot of other ways too. And since we're in a big hurry, I can't get into the details of this, and because So we were able to really accelerate our analysis, and he was indeed the person writing them. So these are the types of cases. Well, these are some of my cases and from the past couple of years to show you the tremendous breadth of cases where language as evidence is of import. Identifying dark web sellers of opioids was matching dark web language use to open web language use, which allowed the Justice Department to arrest and jail somebody who was moving vast amounts of opioids. And the rest are fairly obvious, self-explanatory, I should say. But we don't only do criminal cases because language is useful in all kinds of cases. One thing that I love doing is trademark cases because everybody gets to go home at night and sleep in their own bed and nobody dies, and all the things that are concomitant, unfortunately, in a lot of criminal cases. Contract disputes, patent infringement, and plagiarism. We were involved. The first case Tammy Gales and I ever did together was to assay whether then candidate for the Supreme Court, Sonia Sotomayor, had plagiarized her Princeton University honors thesis. And I'm happy to say that we discovered that she had not. One of Tammy's favorite phrases is, "No one knows they need a linguist, but everyone needs a linguist. Look at all those cases I just showed you." It doesn't occur to people that there is scientific analysis of language data, just like there's scientific analysis of chemical data, but there is. And here are some of the places that our graduates have gotten jobs. The very predictable government and law enforcement agencies, but it's very hard to get jobs in these agencies. A lot of people say to me when I say, well, do you have any idea what you might want to do if you come to the program? And you don't have to know, and you'll know a lot better once you're through the program. And they say, well, I want to be an FBI agent. And I say, okay, but a lot of other people do too. So maybe you want to broaden your horizons. I remember speaking to special agents in the Department of Commerce, and they are special agents just like the FBI, and they work on industrial espionage. And we decided that probably the best way to enter one of these federal agencies as special agents was to aim at one that did not have its own television show, because clearly that's going to be advertising. But having said that, we have NCIS graduates and everything else. Some go on to PhD programs in the US, and private intelligence agencies are increasingly interested in us. And there's quite a number of private intelligence agencies in the world helping corporations and countries analyze data, and also financial institutions and nonprofits. So I'm lucky enough to be involved in these organizations, our very unique graduate program in forensic linguistics, our joint MA-JD with Hofstra Law School, and our popular BA-MA in forensic linguistics, and our world unique Forensic Linguistics Death Penalty Innocence Project. I'll be talking about that a little bit later. I also do consulting, and we are trying to use artificial intelligence in especially authorship cases. So these are a couple of our typical assignments. This is Kaczynski. We'll talk about him in a minute, the Unabomber. So this is called linguistic demographic profiling, like we just did with the depuis longtemps, the since a long time. And this is trying to figure out who wrote something or who did not write something. And you may recognize this first letter here because that's one of the ones in the Hummert case that you folks had received a PDF of. And then something that's extremely important and very, very much in our wheelhouse and unknown to most folks is the ability to analyze ambiguous phrases and underlying meaning. This is a Danish case by our colleague Tanja Christensen, who's the most active forensic linguist on the European continent. And she did a case for their intelligence agency in analyzing messages back and forth from a person who turned out to be recruited by ISIS to go to the Middle East and learn bomb techniques and then return. So every time an expert witness testifies in the US, they have to qualify. There are essentially two kinds of witness. There are fact witnesses and expert witnesses. Fact witness might say, I saw the suspect at 5:42 on Tuesday run behind the garage. An expert witness must have expertise that will allow to explain to a jury what's going on with evidence that the jury would not otherwise be able to understand. And you can't just have anybody walk in and pontificate, of course, and there are these very strict standards called Daubert and Frey that judges institute to see whether somebody's expert testimony should be admitted. So first you have to have the qualifications, and then it has to be appropriate. So here are my qualifications that have helped me get admitted quite a number of times. I think around 30 times now. Of course, it's always in the interest of the other side in our very adversarial legal system to try to say, well, okay, judge, I mean, the person speaks, person has great credentials, but you speak English. The jury speaks English. And that's the funny thing about language. We all do it. We open our mouth and out it comes. But language is so complicated that virtually no one without maybe several decades of study in linguistics has any notion of just how many dimensions and things that come in waves in and out. It's just astonishing. We open our mouths and we speak, and it's like simple as maybe pushing a wheelbarrow. But what we're really doing is navigating a spaceship through space and time in 10 different dimensions at once. And I'm really not overdoing it. And that's one of the fabulous things about being a forensic linguist. We get to work with the most real data in the world and for the highest stakes. And every time we have a case, every time we do an analysis, we learn something about language that we didn't know before. My own background is this. I was born in Brooklyn to a Spanish-speaking neighborhood. And later I studied Spanish and French at Columbia, where I went undergrad and grad. I got to manage a panaderia reposteria in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which was fabulous. And I discovered linguistics. And a lot of language people, they love language. I loved languages. I loved speaking languages and learning languages. And then I found that there was actually a field that I could get into in which I could do what I liked all the time and every day, which was learn about language. So I wanted to begin a new language when I was at Columbia, but all of them were taught Monday through Friday in those days in prehistoric time. And I couldn't take Monday or Friday classes because of my day job as an entertainer, as we were talking about. Only one language was not given Monday through Friday out of 55 languages, Swahili. And I took Swahili knowing absolutely nothing about it, and discovered to my amazement and delight as a crazy language person that there are 15, or it depends on how you want to count them, 18 genders. They're called genders, but they're noun classes. If it were Spanish, in other words, it would be having 15 genders. And 3 of these genders have to do with space and time, different aspects. So of course I fell madly in love with it. So when I got to graduate school, I had to specialize in a language, and I chose Swahili. And then at the end, I said, why don't I get them to send me there? And I got a Fulbright fellowship, and I went to Kenya for 1 year and stayed a grand total of 7. And I studied a lot of other Bantu languages, and then I went to Bangkok to study Thai. So let's look at another demographic profile, linguistic demographic profiling. And this is in the world of forensic linguistics, the most famous, which doesn't mean it's very famous, but among us, it's the most famous. And this is a case of Roger Shai, distinguished research professor at Georgetown, emeritus, who has been my partner for many years and helped us design our graduate program. So read that. Well, wait, we'll come back to it. Here's some ideas for linguistic investigative features that you might want to look at. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some things that we find useful very often, and indeed in the Hummert and in this case. Okay, so now let's go back to, so take a look at that and read it through to yourself. Yep, K and can and daughter, devil strip. Well, non-native, now that's possibility. So let's look at it. As we do our analyses, and as you go through your daily life, what we do is construct competing hypotheses. Even in our daily life, what we're constantly striving to do is explain the non-randomness of what happens. So we look for patterns, and then we find hypotheses. So here we have non-randomness. We have K being used for the K sound in green trash can and in cops. So one hypothesis could be it's a non-native speaker coming from a language in which K instead of C is always used. But then what do we do with come alone or cash? Carlson, we could explain. Maybe the person sees the street sign all the time and knows how to spell Carlson. But anyway, this hypothesis doesn't get us very far, does it? Because, well, now we have daughter misspelled. So maybe the person is just not very educated and not very literate. So let's see if we can explain all of the non-randomness of the features here by saying that the person is not very well educated. Well, So what's the problem with that? And we'll leave devil strip for a moment, but it's good people notice devil strip. I must say I read this 5 times before I even noticed the words devil strip, because I'm a good reader, and good readers jump over things that don't make sense to them. So do you ever want to see your precious little girl? Wait a minute, precious is spelled correctly. Not only is it spelled correctly, it's evidence of someone with a pretty darn good command of English. Because precious, I mean, normally Ransom notes say, I have Susie, pay quick. Okay. But here, do you ever want to see your precious little girl again? Sticking a knife and twisting it into the hearts of the poor parents. Somebody like that probably knows how to spell cops. So Roger Shy hypothesized and almost instantly told the police, do you have in your suspect list, remember we were always trying to use suspect list, although sometimes the suspect list is the whole world, a well-educated man from Akron, Ohio. And I like to think the cops were pretty astonished because they'd say, well, Roger, come on, we know normally you take a week to analyze stuff we give you. What are you, Sherlock Holmes all of a sudden? He's from Akron, Ohio. Does he also, like Sherlock Holmes, or saying he walks with a limp? He was in the army in India, you know, all of these things in all the old movies. And Roger said, look at your list. And sure enough, there was a well-educated man from Akron, Ohio, and he turned out to be the one who had written this. This is a devil strip, but only in Akron, Ohio, and thereabouts. Now, this was an especially good bit of information for Roger because the single most important advice I always give in training FBI agent, training cops, training forensic psychologists is remember who you're dealing with. Remember, we're not just reading a novel. We are dealing with people who are actively trying to disinform us. So suspect everything. If you never know when somebody's trying to mask their own language or masquerade as somebody else, like this guy did. But Devil Strip was brilliant because if you have a name for that strip, I'll bet you $1 that you have no idea that anybody else has a different name until today. In Nassau County, where Hofstra is, it's called a county strip. So I figured it was always called a county strip. And I was lucky, if you want to call it that, even to know that, because my father was always yelling at me that I didn't mow, when I was mowing the lawn as a kid, I wouldn't mow the devil strip because it was, you know, the lawnmower would fall over or there'd be too many trees. And he'd say, you didn't mow the county strip. So that's how I learned. So this was very, very unlikely to be masquerading or masking, see? And Roger was 100% right. What other features show the mistakes to have been disinformation? Perfect punctuation. Somebody doesn't know how to spell cops, but knows how to do all this great punctuation. Also, if you're a native speaker of English, you read it, sounds pretty good. And I love this example because I must have presented this example over 200 times now in different trainings and presentations. And yet there's an infinity of things to find. And I was speaking to a small group of high school students the other day, and one of them pointed out I have written about this in the Handbook of Behavioral Criminology, in law review articles, in other articles, and she pointed out something that I never noticed before. I mean, it's just fabulous. Language is really the gift that gives on giving. And what she pointed out to me was that don't bring anybody along and anyone with you. There's a parallelism there, again, showing fairly good writing skills. And here's a non-randomness. I never noticed it before, nor did anybody who ever had analyzed it with me. And I'm not saying that's, you know, the breakthrough of all breakthroughs, but there's just an infinity of details to notice. Okay. So the Unabomber was one of the longest FBI cases ever. I think it was 17 years. He killed, maimed people by bombing them. And obviously they were trying to find him. And the one sketch they once came up with certainly didn't look anything like Kaczynski. But they were just sort of hoping that maybe the guy that they sketched was the Unabomber, probably just a passersby. But the linguistic profiling by, again, Roger Schei, my mentor and the guy who helped design this program, was very accurate. Kaczynski came up with this very long manifesto, and the FBI brought it to Roger and gave him also letters surrounding the bombings and said, what can you tell us about the Unabomber? And this is what Roger said. So how do we tell that from something somebody writes? Remember what I said, every time you open your mouth or sit down at a keyboard, you're revealing things about yourself. Lucky for us forensic linguists. The Unabomber seemed to misspell words, but Roger knew that there were spelling reforms that had been advanced by the owner of the Chicago Tribune newspaper at just about the time that, if all his other guesses about Kaczynski's, he didn't know it was Kaczynski, of course, the Unabomber's age was right, would be appropriate. A literate and intelligent Chicago area school board might well adopt some of these spellings as his own. So this gave him age and Chicago. Now, after the publisher of the, or the owner, I guess, of the Chicago Tribune died, the editor said, phew, and they dropped those spelling reforms, you know, like THRU for through, stuff like that. Over the history of English spelling, people are always trying to simplify, and it doesn't work very well. So now we have Chicago area and in his 50s. And Kaczynski was indeed born in 1942 in Chicago. He was brilliant. He entered Harvard at age 16 in 1958. How did he know he had lived in the West but wasn't from the West? Because he used a term, and only one term, for a topographical feature. He said, I went out in the Sierra to commune with nature or something. So that's a term that people use in the West. But he never said ranch or fork or mesa. See? So Roger hypothesized he wasn't a native Westerner, but one who had moved there. Try getting a computer program to do this. And the Unabomber wrote rearing children, which at that time was what we linguists call Northern Cities US dialect, which was, again, Chicago. So the Unabomber was turned in by his brother, but all these things pointed to him. All right, so this is the case that you got the PDF on and that I used, and I gave you the exact same PDF I just gave when I was training behavioral analysis unit agents who deal with language. Because I thought it also might be very interesting for you folks to see what it is that we forensic linguists, academic and practicing, do. So profiling and authorship are on a continuum because what we're doing is matching up non-randomness, right? So non-randomness of a native English speaker or a non-native English speaker, and then Mary or John, and it's on a continuum. So sometimes when we're doing investigative cases, we will narrow the suspect pool down to some demographic unit, but then we have all sorts of details that don't really fit one way or another. But then when they give us a suspect list, we have those details that we can then try to match to the language patterns of a single individual. So as you know, Mrs. Hummert, well, Mr. Hummert received on his windshield a couple of letters that you saw and will see, written about the woman, I should say. The woman was found murdered. And then as the investigation heated up, a self-confessed serial killer wrote letters to newspaper and the police and said, I killed Charlene Hummert, not her husband. This is my 5th victim. I'm getting good at it. So the Pennsylvania State Police came to me and said, what can you tell us about whoever wrote these letters? Back to our linguistic investigative features, and remember the thing on the bottom in yellow. Beware of disinformation at all times. So here is a redacted, shortened first one. Again, you guys have all, you have this. So just take a look at this for a sec. So now let's compare it to the letter that came after poor Mrs. Hummert was murdered. Okay, that one was typed. This one is sort of scrawled the way we saw the devil strip letter, actually. And there's all sorts of odd things like capital Fs for no good reason. The crossouts were redactions. This is an actual photograph of the letter the police gave me at the time. So here it is transcribed. So if any of you watch the forensic files or the investigation discovery, you'll know that eventually I saw that even though these were very, very different on the surface, and probably the person who wrote this, if it was the same person, which it was, of course, that wrote the first letter, was trying to disassociate himself with the writer of the first letter. Now, it's pretty different, but under the surface, the bones, you might say, were pretty much the same. And it'd be one thing to just say, well, I think some of this is subterfuge and masquerade and masking, but we had to, the police wanted, I didn't know this, to convince the judge to grant a search warrant to get all of the husband's writings. And then I saw that there were two very interesting things in the letters. Yeah, both letters reference Christian holidays, no articles, but you know, a lot of this is dumbing down, I think, because underneath the bones are very complicated. We'll get to that in a second. The second letter is what the FBI calls a POMIC, which of course stands for, but you all knew that, right? The FBI loves initialisms, of course. Post-defense manipulation of investigation communication, otherwise known as a red herring letter, intended to divert suspicion. And this is a very, very common thing that we get in investigations. Somebody, either the person who is under investigation or perhaps the wife, girlfriend, mother, boyfriend of that person, writes a letter trying to divert suspicion away from the person who the police are after. So it turns out that there's a lot that's similar here. And there's so much in these letters. I so wish we had a couple of hours and I could talk to everybody and hear. And I'm sure some of you would give me things that I have never seen or heard of before, because as I keep saying, there's almost an infinity of features. But looking at the stalker and serial killer letters, and where'd the chat go? Anyway, let's look at all the things that are similar. Similar dialect. It's not like one is a New York dialect and one is a Southern dialect. There we go. Similar education level, if you discount what I think is disinformation, dumbing down in the serial killer letter. Yeah, somebody says short, blunt sentences, but good control of the language. And Tammy reminds everybody, we do have hours to discuss these letters in class. And some of the, oh, good, you've been reading, excellent. Okay, yeah. So one of the things I studied in Swahili was narrative structure, because that's what sociolinguists do. And Swahili has this great series of tenses that structure narrative in a particular cohesive way. So when I look at any writing in any language, the narrative structure comes and jumps out at me. And I realized that even the second letter, the poemic, had an incredibly complex narrative structure and time shifts. Very, very well executed flashbacks, flash forwards, or predictions, departure from narrative progression to add information, and did it so well that I wasn't even aware of it the first 20, 30 times I read the darn things. That bespeaks somebody who is an excellent writer. And if you want a contrast, ask your nephew or little brother who's 7 years old to coherently tell you the plot of a movie or a TV show he just saw, okay? And it's very, very difficult. And you need a lot of practice to do all these things really coherently. Then also, I noticed this ironic repetition. We called it ironic repetition because there was no word for it yet. And here it is. I would have loved to have found out. A couple of days later, she made sure my fiancée found out. She dumped me and then had an abortion. We had an affair for the past 9 months. She wanted to break it off, so I broke her neck. So I walked over to our great friends, the ancient Greek and Latin professors, and I said, what's this rhetorical device called? We do this all the time, by the way, with them. They're great. And they might say, oh, that's a very common rhetorical device, in which case it's like spelling cat, C-A-T. Well, maybe I shouldn't use that example with you guys, but in other words, not something to differentiate among authors. But this was so rare that at Brigham Young University, there's an encyclopedia, online encyclopedia of rhetorical device. And this guy said, gee, I don't have any particular word for that. So on that basis, the judge said, okay. So then we got the chief suspect, who you have all guessed is the husband. And we noticed, to our astonishment, because I had never seen it before or since, very, very idiosyncratic linguistic behavior. If you find the same odd idiosyncratic behavior in both the question document, the anonymous documents, and known documents, you're on to something, maybe. So here we saw contraction patterns. Negative did not sometimes stayed did not, sometimes became didn't. But every single positive verb stayed uncontracted. And these are some of the slides that I walked the jury through. Exact same pattern, exact same pattern. exact same pattern. Look at these numbers. Look at this skewing. In his known writings, like from jail and from, because he was already in custody, and from work, 74 non-contracted verbs, zero positive verbs contracted. 23 in the 2 letters, 0 contracted. So that was pretty good. And then we checked it with on a baseline of Google, which we wouldn't do now for a long story, but we have very, very good corpora now to do that. But I just wanted to make sure this wasn't something everybody did. And if everybody did it, we would find much smaller number here, and that didn't happen. So I said, okay, where do we not find a lot of contractions? Google Scholar. So scholarly papers obviously aren't going to be contracted too much. And we would have a very small number here, but we don't. But interestingly, I learned that I like that scholarly papers almost never have negative contractions. File that away for your next case in something or other. And certainly not just based on my testimony, Hummard was sentenced to life without parole for strangling her. And if you want more detail on that, take a look at the case that's referenced in the PDF. So here is, as I say, our world unique Forensic Linguistics Death Penalty Innocence Project. And I'll explain the case that started us on this. So our students, interns, they're taking a class called internship, supervised by faculty, reanalyze language evidence crucial to the murder, conviction, and death sentence of someone, which is typically testimony, interrogation, or what is called a confession. Sometimes we look at it and there is no confession there, amazingly. And we also work for investigators. Students and I spent 8 months helping track and charge a serial killer in the American South by showing that the suicide note of one of the people supposedly having committed suicide, both happened to be husbands of this one woman, did not write his own suicide note. And we demonstrated that the odds were overwhelming that the woman had, the one with the 2 dead husbands, and we think many more husbands because she kept changing her name. So Antoine Kuby, Chicago, 1996, accused of murder and armed robbery. Major evidence was a signed confession. And the police said Kuby agreed to confess, and he spoke, and they wrote down every word he said. Kuby was sentenced to life in prison. And here that is. Antoine says he was interrogated and beaten, and those days in Chicago were bad old days for that. As we will see, it's hardly a rumor. It's very well substantiated that the police in Chicago in those days were torturing people right and left. And there were many big court cases about it. What happened was these guys had been in Vietnam, in the war in Vietnam, and they had learned how to torture people by torturing suspected Viet Cong soldiers, agents, informants. And they knew how to use electricity and all sorts of really horrible stuff. And the emergency rooms in Chicago started seeing patterns, right? Non-random distribution of data. And that's how it became uncovered. But nobody ever was imprisoned, that is, who were doing these terrible torturings. However, it turns out, as you'll see, that it was almost, well, it turned out that I guess there's no something in the world that is 1000% bad, because that allows Kuby to get another chance. Okay, so they told him, here, sign this, you get your call, and he signed. Next time he saw that piece of paper, which we just saw before, it was that confession typed over it. Okay, so my students and I analyzed. We had known writings of QB's from then. He wrote to his aunt and to his girlfriend, and we saw very, very distinctive patterns, and I won't go into the details here, but the general findings are nothing matched QB, except maybe it was in English. But guess who they did match? They matched the testimony of the officer who, one of the two who interrogated him. And QB says that wasn't even the guy who wrote it, because he was out of the room or something. I don't remember now the details. I've been doing this case so long. So we showed that there was no way on God's green earth that QB wrote this and that it was likely written by the detective. That's 6 years ago. You would think, you know, the door of the jail swings open. Marty Tankleff and others can tell us that that doesn't happen so quickly. So no convincing match. I'll just give you one feature. It's called complementarities of deletion or insertion. And throughout all these features, we get Q means question document. So that's the confession, 8% deletion, 1 out of 13. But the supposed thing that QB dictated, 86%. Also, typically, you expect less when somebody is speaking, which supposedly was the confession, and more when they're writing, which were these writings. So these numbers are even further apart than they are strictly from just 8 and 86%. And we had a number of features like this. It simply wasn't written by QB. So it turns out that QB had expended all of his appeals. I went over to the law school and I got Eric Friedman, distinguished constitutional law professor, and he said, look, Rob, I know you think justice is not being done, but QB's never getting out. It doesn't make any difference. We're going to have some unbelievable intervention to allow him to get out, because you can use up your appeals. How do you like that? And here comes the Torture Inquiry and Relief Commission. And here is a letter they wrote to me when I approached them. And I said, look, QB didn't write it. QB was tortured. And there was a new law passed that said, even if you weren't tortured by these original guys, if you were tortured in that period of time, you get another appeal. And that's what's happening now. And notice this is a letter from 2016, but we are marching through. So that's what started us on our Forensic Linguistics Innocence Project. Professor Friedman and I vet a vast number of cases, and then those are the ones we work on. People who are actually on death row, slated to die, obviously get first call, but we'll do other serious crimes and work for investigators as well. So I'll end with a case that I always found curious, to say the least, and well, anyway, you'll see. So sometimes the narrative that you're approaching things can limit you and not help you. Sometimes you think, well, I'm really an expert on X, but that sort of can limit you too. So a house in Beverly Hills, a mansion, a great big mansion, a wildly big mansion in Beverly Hills, started receiving bomb threats. I believe they all were in 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. Okay, so notice the odd folding of it, and it goes up and down. Here's another one. Now this I found very odd, because going to be a gas bomb here, this house. Why here and this house? Was it here, this house? And then the third one, which mentioned Jodie Foster. Now that was really interesting. And here they are, all three of them. So high net worth individuals, as we say in the biz, have their own police forces and protection agencies. And the head of the very rich guy who owned this mansion they said, well, we're out of our league here. So we just have to. And so they went to a private intelligence agency, which was run by former CIA agents. And they looked at this and they say, well, we're out of our wheelhouse here. Who are we going to get? So one of them had seen me do a presentation. And so they got me. So they gave me these and they say, what do you think? I said, well, I said, I don't know. All right. So they said, what about the capital B's? I said, well, I don't know. If we find somebody and he does these weird capital B's, that'll be, remember, profiling to authorship analysis. So if we find somebody with the B's, fine. Before that, I don't know. I said, look, the way you have to operate with letters like this that don't really tell you much, except that they're very weird, is you got to look for information outside the four corners of the piece of paper. So going to be a gas bomb, we get this twice. What the heck is a gas bomb? The only gas bomb I know is these people who bombed the Japanese subway with sarin. So let's do this. Let's go to the FBI and have them run through the communicated threat assessment database and see maybe somebody just got out of jail in Pittsburgh who used to put gas bombs in. And they said, no, sorry, we can't do that. I said, why not? And I said, the local police know, right? Oh, well, yeah, they know. So have them ask the FBI field office to do it. And they said, well, our police force doesn't talk to the FBI. I said, oh, that's great. What is this, some bad made-for-TV movie where the local cops don't talk to the FBI for some reason? I mean, think about it. If some bomb goes off, I said, look, we have no control over that. We're 3 things removed from them. I said, okay. So Jodie Foster. Now, Jodie Foster is, of course, an actor and a director, but in the old days, she was this really, really well-known actor, beautiful, was in all these different movies. And this crazy guy named Hinckley tried to kill President Reagan because he said, Jodie Foster doesn't know I'm alive. And if I kill President Reagan, she will. So he went and he got a gun and he shot at President Reagan. He shot at Brady. He shot at other people. And what's she doing in this? What does she have to do with this gas bomb, whatever the heck gas bomb is? So the CIA guys keep sweating me and I say, I don't know. And they say, well, what about the folds? I say, I don't know. Maybe it's from a language like somewhere in Asia that is written. Yes, well, I don't know. And then I said, all right, guys, let's just stop. Let me think. What am I doing wrong here? Assuming that there's an answer to this. I'm limiting myself because I keep thinking that this is these standard threat letters that we get. What if they aren't? What if this house or more, Jodie Foster, why is she all the way out here in left field? Why is this house all the way down here? What if this isn't a letter? What if this is something else? This is a slide I did for the Yale Sherlock Holmes Society. They love stuff like this. So, I should end the presentation here, of course, all right, it's elementary, Watson. And I wonder if Sherlock Holmes is ever as stunned as I was in what I'm about to tell you when things actually turn out to be correct. Maybe Sherlock is always knowledgeable. Me, I was just guessing. But what if this is not a letter? What if it is a map? A over there is where Jodie Foster lives. This blurred out area is where this house is. Then I put the map over the letter and we get Jodie Foster up here. That's where Jodie lives. This house, that's here. Gas bomb, Studio City. The darn thing is a map. And as I say, nobody could have been more surprised than me. So I call up the CIA guys and they say, oh, okay, we'll get right back to you. And that moment, somebody came back from vacation and recognized the letter, like I had hoped was going to happen with the CTAD, the database. Oh, that's Joe. Yeah, he used to stalk Jody in Boston or something like that. The police picked him up. He never talked, never gave any information, and at least no bomb went off at Studio City. So to recap, we wring information out of language evidence. And we also offer 1-week intensives to professionals and individuals. And thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Leonard. How about if Dr. Gales and Dr. Kropp facilitate questions about your presentation from the chat for a little bit. And I just want to ask everybody, we're going to hold off on questions about programs and admissions for breakout sessions that will follow. But first, discussion and questions about the presentation for Dr. Leonard.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
You are.
Okay. Actually, Rob, most of the comments that came in were analytic comments, so not questions necessarily about the individual analyses. Lots of great insights, though. I mean, people had incredible insights into your questions as you were going through the analyses. So one of the last ones was interesting. Is linguistic evidence is readily accepted in court as the evidence from traditional sciences? Do you want to touch on that since you've been an expert witness in many, many different jurisdictions?
Sure. It depends on the actual case. I, for example, no judge has ever said that I'm not qualified. The problem, of course, is, does an expert need to be bothered with if a jury can figure something out? So one case that Tammy and I worked on, the evidence was 250,000 pages of Spanish. This was for an English-speaking court. So, you know, nobody argued that the jury was going to bring in 250,000 pages. But sometimes, especially if the other side tries very hard, they'll say that there's no science here, that the jury can't figure it out. It's that old, the jury speaks English, you speak English. So it really is on a case-by-case basis.
I also got a question about handwriting, the difference between what we do and handwriting analysis. So some of the students were looking, or some of the attendees were thinking about some of the handwriting in some of the messages and how that plays a role in what we do or don't do.
Yeah, we stay far away from handwriting analysis. I had long talks with the head of the FBI handwriting analysis section years ago. And number one, as far as I know, you can never get it admitted in court, but it could be useful. You know, there are things that are useful in investigations that you don't expect to have to be able to say in court. So there's linguistic and, well, there's behavioral profiling like the BAU does that help find suspects, but you can never testify, I think it's this person because he matches our behavioral profile. So we don't do handwriting. There are people who do handwriting, but sometimes this expert told me that if you use a felt pen, all bets are off, and even ballpoints are hard. So that's all I really know about handwriting.
So there are a couple other questions. One or two I think are better for me to deal with. Oh, and did you want to introduce me?
Yes. Wait 1 second, Tammy. Can you collaborate more on the week intensive? Oh, talk. Okay, yeah.
No,
so,
I've got all those written down.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah. Dr. Tammy Gales, she and I have been working together for a number of years. I am proud to report that I was able to steal her from the University of Wisconsin. She and I met in Amsterdam. No,
Seattle.
Amsterdam.
We met in Seattle first, then in Amsterdam.
You're right. See, this is why it's so useful to have partners. And we've worked on hundreds of cases. So she is one of the world's experts, absolute experts on stalking, threatening communication, and what's called corpus linguistics, which sometimes in the press is referred to as big data usage in linguistics. And she's also a fabulous teacher and just loved by the students, very collaborative and very, very brilliant in her scientific method, as many a student has said to me. Carry on.
Can I interrupt for just a moment here? I just realized something. So as Dean of Hofstra College, I would really like to point out for just a moment, please, everyone, that the 3 faculty members with us today from the Department of Comparative Literature, Languages, and Linguistics are all recipients of Hofstra's Teacher of the Year Award, different years. So that just tells you something about our department and this program.
Thanks.
Going back to mute now.
Right.
And now I'm blushing.
Yeah.
All right, so now I will continue vetting questions now that people know who I am. Thank you. Another one, Rob, that would be good for you is, so the short Twitter message format, how are the different modalities of different registers changing the way in which people write or use language, and is the change predictable?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. And you have to always take into consideration what the medium is. However, you can't overdo it. For example, people will say, well, emails, that's a very informal thing. But I've seen emails that are written even more formally than the old letters. The other thing that it's easy to give too much credit or credence to is that because we're using these different formats, it's affecting language and it's different. One time on the stand, I was asked by a prosecutor who wished she hadn't afterwards, the fact that people are texting and there's this texting slang and texting code, isn't that just like a completely different language than English? And I said, well, let's put it into perspective. Any reasonable English speaker can learn that texting code in 2 days. Could you learn Chinese in 2 days? So while they are variants of English, they are variants and they are very predictable in some ways. But we love texts, for instance, because there aren't a lot of rules. People vary so much individually. So when we're doing an authorship analysis, we love things that are variable in language. Except for that one example you give, I've never seen cat misspelled before. So that doesn't do us very good. Doesn't do very well for us. But the way people use commas, God help me, that NCIS agent that I referred to when she was a student, she and another student cataloged 24 different ways people used commas in that serial killer case. I don't know if that's a full answer to your question, but.
And there are a lot of very specific questions on cases. So I'm going to do some of the more broad overview questions at the moment, and maybe you can take time to correspond to some of the more specific questions later.
Sure, but feel free to answer anything in your wheelhouse, which is, of course, everything that's in mine.
Well, I will be getting there.
Okay.
I'm keeping you on the spot for now.
All righty.
Because this is a great you question. What is the next frontier of forensic linguistics?
Corpus linguistics.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah. Yes, certainly corpus linguistics, all kidding aside. And I'm involved in this startup that is trying to, one of the government agencies that I work for said, couldn't you make some software that at least gives us a head start on authorship? So I don't have to, when I have a suspect, put in a request to hire you, wait 3 months, literally sometimes, before, Washington approves it and stuff. By then, the guy's died of old age. So couldn't I get Rob Leonard on a laptop? And I said, well, probably not, but I'll see what we can do. And then, although Tammy and I know brilliant computational linguists, the number of variables that we bring to bear in authorship cases, it's just so much that it's so hard to write manageable code for that. But then I got involved with these two statistics professors who were playing around with such things, but they didn't know much about language, and I certainly didn't know anything about statistics. And long story short, we are now trying to do authorship, an engine that actually will do a preliminary job on authorship. But I'd stick with corpus linguistics.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to combine two other questions into one because I think that's appropriate. So a few people had questions about the 1 week intensive, which would be better to talk about for that. And sure. I think going forward, if we're still keeping it on the schedule, we're trying to do a summer option for that too.
Yeah.
Which makes it easier for undergrad students to be able to participate in that without conflicting with other classes. But so I'll let you talk about that. But the other question is related to foreign languages. Are they a big part of forensic linguistics, or is it more centrally focused on English linguistics? So since, especially in the fall intensive, you're working with Dr. Christensen, that kind of ties into that question.
Sure. Most of the work that's done in forensic linguistics is on English, because the big centers of it are us and Aston University in Birmingham, England, very good friends and allies of ours, and Australia. Now, though, and Tammy is an official of the International Association of Forensic Linguists and can talk about the groundswell in, for example, South Africa and other places. But most things are done right now in about English, because there are forensic linguists who are trained and have decades of work and have case experience. But I've done cases in Chinese, Japanese, Armenian, Turkish, etc., without speaking those languages, because I get the best PhD sociolinguist, typically from Georgetown or someplace, to work with me on those cases. And then the two of us together can work very well on case, even though I don't know that language. So I think that's as much of an answer as we can have at the moment, but it is spreading.
And then the 1 week intensive.
Oh, wait, what about the 1 week intensive? Oh, language. Yeah. So no, it's an English language course, but the fall intensive is with Dr. Tanya Christensen, who I was saying before is the most active linguist on the continent of Europe. She works with the Bundeskriminalamt, the FBI of Germany, and people all over Scandinavia and Europe. So she brings a different point of view. Also, the fall intensive is more generally introductory to the full field of forensic linguistics. We do civil cases, we do how to work defense cases, as well as investigation, terrorism, etc., which we also do. The spring course I co-teach with Jim Fitzgerald, who was the supervisory special agent in charge of forensic linguistics for the FBI. And there we mostly do our terrorism, counterterrorism cases and criminal investigation cases. And both intensives are heavily case oriented, and we work very closely, and we limit the number of students, and we work very closely. The students work in teams, then they work with us back and forth. So they really have the experience that we have when we work a case.
And then a couple other questions in terms of what kinds of cases do we work? I know you kind of covered this before, but questions about authorship versus percentage of other kinds of cases that come through.
Well, in terms of civil cases, we do more trademark cases. Tammy and I were...
My favorite.
What?
It's my favorite.
Yeah. We never thought it would be our favorite, but it turns out to be. And as I say, everybody gets to go home and they don't get chopped up into little pieces like some of our other cases. But so trademark, we were Apple's linguists against both Amazon and Microsoft in a trademark case to to preserve the use of App Store. So we do a lot of civil cases, wills that are manipulated and people don't think they're going, well, that could be authorship too. But we do a lot of authorship, but a lot of discourse analysis. All of the things that I said are about equal. False confession cases are very, very big. Also, does somebody understand his or her Miranda warning? And right now I have 3 cases brewing just this week that are exactly about that.
And somebody else had asked about access to data. That was a little while ago, but I can answer that one. So within both the 1-week intensives and the internships, students are able to work on actual cases or cases that we recently worked on. So you get access to all sorts of different kinds of real data. But then we also have one thing that's really amazing at Hofstra. And our amazing dean was so nice to fund this, or getting the data. Roger Shai, who is the founder of Forensic Linguistics in the US, recently retired, even though he will never retire. Rob, how old is he now? 90? 90.
And we're working a defamation case in Japan right now. Just before I came onto this, I was with him.
Yeah, so he's still working, and he just wrote another book. I mean, he is so prolific and so active still, but he said he was retiring. But he sent us 35 plus years of his casework, which we have in a room. Thank you, Dean Rifkin, for allowing us to bring this information out. And it is invaluable data. It's data going back to the 70s, things that they're making movies about right now. We actually have the data in that room on the side of our office. And students are actively scanning and digitizing it. So this is something that if you come to Hofstra, you might be able to be a part of that process. And it's just a treasure trove of data, his testimony, his case reports, and this is exclusive to Hofstra students. So this is data that will help move the field forward in terms of where we go with authorship cases and how we're identifying features and looking at the way that trademark cases have evolved and all sorts of different things. It literally, every time I go in there and every time I open a box, I get shivers. It's really
there was a question on whether the intensives are going to be online. The intensive coming in the spring is going to be online for sure. So, and we don't know what's going to happen next fall yet.
So this is a good point for me to come in. I would like to say one thing in particular about the program, and then we'll shift gears a little bit for those who are interested. And that is that it's been my pleasure to attend some of the presentations done by our students in forensic linguistics. And I just want to assure everybody who's interested in the possibility of coming to Hofstra that our students do real projects. Their projects are not merely regurgitation of memorized material. They're analyzing data, creating hypotheses, testing them against the data, drawing conclusions, and presenting them. So this is all real, original work to prepare them to enter the field as forensic linguists. So what we're going to do now that is a little different is that those folks who are interested in asking questions about the program are welcome to stay on in one of 2 different ways. So I'm going to ask Dr. Gales to talk about the program in the various manifestations, the BAMA for those who are high school students or who teach high schoolers, who would like to do a 5-year bachelor's degree in linguistics with a 5th year completing their master's in forensic linguistics, as well as those who are interested in, who've already have their bachelor's degree, interested in a master's degree in forensic linguistics, possibly combined with a law degree at Hofstra or other options. So that's going to be Dr. Gale staying in this very Zoom room. You need do nothing. She'll be right here to answer your questions. And Dr. Leonard, if you're able to stick around for that, that'd be great. And then,
could I say, Ben, could I say one thing? There's a question I just want to answer. Okay, sorry to make it. From Jaima and at Surrey University. What type of work is done with public defenders? Anything related to trial discourse? For example, the opening, closing arguments? Yes, all the time, all the time. Also matching the actual evidence that that witnesses testified to with what is represented in the openings and closings. That's been something that we do routinely in our Innocence Project and also our own cases. Great question. Sorry, Ben.
Thank you. So those of you who know that you're interested and want to find out more about the admissions process, I've just put in the chat a link. You would leave this Zoom and go to another one with Fred Karomi, who's an assistant dean for graduate admissions at Hofstra, and he'll be there to answer your questions. In addition, Dr.
We work hand in glove with Fred. He is our dedicated admissions person, knows more about the program than we do. And this is a really, really fabulous opportunity to actually speak one-on-one with him.
Right. But that's for entrance into the graduate program. For any high school students with us tonight, or teachers who teach at the high school level, probably will benefit more from talking with Dr. Gales about the BA/MA program. Any questions about the department as a whole, comparative literatures, language, and linguistics? Dr. Kropp has put his email address in the chat, and he'll be happy to answer your questions by email. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. This is my second or third time attending a presentation on forensic linguistics, and every single time it's just wonderful and fascinating. And I'm so proud of my colleagues and the terrific work they do, not only with our students, but in conjunction in particular with Project Innocent, to exonerate the falsely convicted. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Gales. Dr. Leonard, you have a question or comment?
Yes, one thing. Dr. Kopp is the chair of our umbrella department, comparative literature, languages, and we teach far more languages. We teach 2 African languages, Arabic and Swahili. We teach German. We teach ancient Greek. We teach modern Greek, you name it, and Russian. And guess who one of our professors is? Dean Ben. John, what are some of the other languages we teach? It's really a very impressive array. Very few schools, even in the New York City area, the only ones I can think of are NYU and Columbia, that teach anywhere near the number of languages that we do. You're muted. You're muted, John. Okay.
I'm good. Thanks, Ben. So we also offer German, Greek, Latin, and Japanese and Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the Department of Romance, Languages, and Literatures, French, Spanish, and Italian, of course.
Right.
And it's for students interested in the Bachelor Master's program, the 5-year program, you start taking graduate classes while you're still in your 4-year undergrad, and you can easily double major linguistics and a foreign language, no problem.